Welcome to the Carl Nelson Show on Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio and live around the world on WOLDCnews.com.
And thank you for joining us, folks, or staying with us. We're going to have a discussion on race with Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, because a lot of folks don't want to talk about race. And we just had the last caller who just said, you know, even amongst ourselves, we don't want to have a discussion about race. I wonder what white people do. Do they discuss race when they're amongst themselves, when we're not around, if they talk about race? But we are afraid to talk about it, even amongst ourselves. You know, I don't get that part. You know, I understand some of the reluctance to talk about race when you're amongst white folks or any other race and have a really frank discussion. You know, no hate, you know, no hating. Just be really frank and candid about the situation of racism. As Neely Fuller says, it involves everything. And if you don't understand racism, then every single thing will confuse you. 800-450-7876. Dr. Welsing is joining us now. Dr. Welsing, welcome back to WOL Radio.
Oh, yes, I'm very glad to be with you, Carl.
Help us out.
Well, let me just begin by saying that some time ago, I spoke out at Lorton Prison when that was operative, and American University had a program, educational program, or sponsored some program, and I went and I spoke to the prisoners about racism. And the white female professor who was involved in the program and who had driven me there and was bringing me back. On the way back home, we're driving in the car, and she said, Dr. Welsing, I hate to admit this, but on all social occasions, when it's people who classify themselves as white are together and there are no black people around, she said, we are talking negatively about black people. And the assumption is that everybody present is in agreement. And so I didn't get upset. I told her that I understood why that would take place and that it was that they were talking code about white genetic survival. But her statement was on all social occasions. When it's white people and no black people present, they are talking negatively about black people. So, as I said, my thesis that racism is a behavioral system consciously and subconsciously evolved by people who classify themselves as white, ultimately for white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation. So it's not just, people who are just hateful. That the behavior that is experienced by us as black people as terrorism, as discrimination, whatever we want to label it, that for people who classify themselves as white, it is for their genetic survival on the planet. Now, just because we have not understood that, you see, I would say only more or less recently has that been understood. I would say first through the work of Neely Fuller, and then my work after encountering Mr. Fuller, because I was a psychiatrist looking for what was making black people mentally ill. I was a physician in training in psychiatry. And I didn't really always think I was going to be a psychiatrist. When I was in medical school, I thought, well, maybe I'll do obstetrics or pediatrics. And only by accident did I end up, it's a long story how I ended up doing a residency in general psychiatry at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And I thought, well, I'll just do this for a year, and then I'll go back to Chicago and do a residency in pediatrics. Well, it didn't work like that. And after I started talking to patients, I did residency in psychiatry, 1963 to 1966 at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. It was a government hospital at that time, federal government hospital. And, of course, there were black and white patients, and you were responsible for treating both. But in talking to black patients, there was always this element of racism in their histories, even though they weren't talking, using that term necessarily. They were just talking about their life experience. And racism was always right there in the middle. Just like if I did a history on you, racism, you talked about your life and the fact that you had a program and racism was being talked about. In my history, every black person's history, racism is sitting front and center. The experience of their parents, the experience of their grandparents, great-grandparents, Racism is sitting right there in the middle of their histories. See, in much the same way that Jewish people with their history in Europe and their history also in the United States up to certain points in time, their histories would be suffused with anti-Semitism. I talked to a patient in my office this week, and she was talking about the history of her grandmother, and that the grandmother had come from Russia, and when the Jews were being mistreated, the grandmother spent a period of time hiding in the woods. And she talked about how that impacted her life and then how it impacted the life of her children, which would have been the patient's mother. So discrimination was always front and center in black people's history. And so I said, even though it was not talked about in the training program, there was nothing focusing on the mental health of black people, other than to say black people didn't have the intelligence to benefit from psychotherapy, and the best treatment for black people would be medication. Well, that was not acceptable to me. And I was just on my own pursuing what is making black people mentally ill. And long story short, I ran into Neely Fuller, met him for the first time. He was talking about racism being a system, a total local, national, global system of behavior for maintaining the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. But, that's a long story. But racism is, and I'm a physician. I'm a psychiatric physician. I'm a third generation in my family physician. And so my approaching racism was to understand it. Not to hate white people, but to understand this destructive dynamic that was in the lives of black people. And if I was going to be an effective psychiatric physician, I needed to understand it. What is it? Why has it always been in our history, certainly in this part of the world, let's say for the last 500 years? Do you see? So the very fact that people are classified in this area of the world and throughout the world by people who classify themselves as white. People are broken down into basically two classifications. You're either white or you're non-white. You know, people are not classified based on the content of their character. They are formally classified. Government records. What are you? Are you white or are you not white? And that's your basic classification that follows you from the day you were born to the day that you die. And whether a person likes it or not, or thinks it ought to be, or that it should not be, it's the reality.
Is that global?
I would say to the extent that racism and white supremacy is global, yes. You're either in the white classification or in your non-white classification, and that is extremely important. I'm going to read my definition of racism is the only one-paragraph definition that covers the entire behavior phenomenon. And let me just read it, okay? Racism, white supremacy is a local and global power system and dynamic structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consist of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity, economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet upon which the vast and overwhelming majority of people are classified as non-white, meaning black, brown, red, and yellow, by white-skinned people. And all of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. And that's the only one definition, one paragraph definition of racism, white supremacy. And it covers...
Hold right there, Doc, because we have taken this draft report.
Real Talk Radio in the AM. Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
Thank you for staying with us. And my guest is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. We're having the discussion you don't want to have, especially those of you who have colleagues or work with people of other races. We're talking about race. People don't want to talk about race. So, Dr. Welsing, help us out why our people, even in our own conversations, are afraid to have this discussion.
Well, I would say basically that black people are afraid to talk about racism and don't want to talk about racism. Let's say black people talk about racism on the parking lot, on their job, They talk about how they are treated or mistreated and how they're not promoted and who said what to whom. But they don't talk about it necessarily and file complaints. But it's ever present, and they talk about it, but they don't want to talk about it because they will upset people who classify themselves as white. I mean, if every black person who felt discriminated against on a job spoke up on their job, they would fear being, being in hot water with the white supervisors and the white administrators of the management on jobs, but they are experiencing discrimination. I mean, if you were to do a radio survey and ask all the black people who work whether or not they feel that they are being treated with justice on their job, you have at the 99.9% level that they're not being treated fairly. So they are experiencing aspects of racism. All you have to do is just turn on the TV. I have my television on right now on mute, and all of the images are of white people. White people talking, white men, white women talking about the news. White, 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 white. Any channel I turn to, it's going to be, for the most part, white, 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 white. One or two black people on one channel or another. But white, 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 white. News discussion about Cuba. And when you see images of the Cuban people, even though the majority of the Cuban people are people of color, you see people who look white, 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 white. So discussion about, whether, my television is on mute. And so you don't hear people, but what is it that you see on the television? You don't see equal numbers of black and white people. And so race is up in your face, being talked about visually every single time you turn on the television. And people are learning, little children sitting in front of the television are learning their role in life. When they don't see, if you see a picture of a black person and that black person is almost the same color as a suntan white person, but that's not the color of most black people. And so children are learning their role just by looking at television, even if the television is on mute. You see, but black people, from the time that we were brought as enslaved African people to this part of the world in the slave trade, black people have, been in pain and been in hopes that the pain will end. Pain because of mistreatment by the people who classify themselves as white. And that pain has been continuous up to the very present, even though there's a black president. You see, if somebody looks at his face, you can see that he is in pain. The way that he is treated and the way that he is talked about. And the number of death threats that he has received from people who classify themselves as white. See, his face looks like he's in pain. Bearing the pain, but he's in pain. And I'm sure everybody in his family is, By the time his children look at the news, or maybe they have a policy, we don't look at the news so that the children, we don't look at it as a family affair so that the children don't have to be in pain about how their father is talked about. You see, and the president can't talk about racism or won't talk about it or is afraid to talk about it, so that his Attorney General, Eric Holder, the then Attorney General, had to say one of the most important things that has been said this century. Are we a nation of cowards being unable to talk about racism? Are we a nation of cowards? Are we a nation of people in fear of talking about the most important topic, the most important dynamic, not only in this country but in the world? And interestingly, a white person pointed out to me many years ago that the word America, America, contains, using every letter once, the phrase, I am race. And I always thought that was absolutely fascinating, because this is the one thing, again, as Eric Holder said, are we a nation of cowards being unable to talk about racism? See, race, R-A-C-E, is only relevant in a system, power system dynamic, a structure of racism, where particular genetic characteristics are focused on and the key consideration around the classification of people. And on this planet, under the control at the point in history of people who classify themselves as white, one could begin with Greece and Rome, that part of global history. People who classify themselves as white. And because white is a genetic recessive trait, in other words, if everybody on this planet right now today stopped focusing on skin color and everybody just melded genetically together, white would disappear.
All right, hold that thought right there, Doc, because you got to step aside for a couple of announcements. We'll come back, I'll let you finish up. And also, you come back and tell us, can racism be eradicated? Or we just have to work within the system? Folks, you too can join the conversation with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Where else can you hear a discussion on race? But right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Real talk radio in the AM.
The #1 morning show. #1 on everybody list.
Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
Thank you for staying with us on Advanced Psychiatrist, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. We're having a very frank and candid discussion about race, subject that many of us are afraid to even have amongst ourselves, let alone with our white colleagues and co-workers. And Dr. Welsing is explaining why. Dr. Welsing, before we left for the break, I was asking you, can racism ever be totally eradicated, or is it something that we're going to have to work within?
Carl, the brain is made in such a way that any problem that the human brain can conceive is something that can be worked on and solved. I think about engineering structures such as the dam, Grand Coulee Dam. Great, big, huge engineering structures. They just got through the engineers expanding the Suez Canal, Panama Canal. There's a big structure. I live at 16th Street of Military Road, a huge engineering project rebuilding the bridge. Anything that people apply the human brain to can be solved if people want to solve it. And so, of course, I started, Neely Fuller's work that helped me understand racism as a system. The idea his work was to not spend time hating white people, but to change this destructive system and replace a system of injustice with a system of justice so that there can be peace on the planet. And so, again, any problems, and so I spent, much of my professional career trying to further understand what is it, because with science, the whole idea of science is to study something so that you can understand it, and if it needs to be changed, you change it. The whole field of medicine. People come to the doctor and say, "Doctor, I'm in pain," or something is wrong. And they want from the doctor to be able to help them understand what's wrong, make me well, restore my health. And so, as I said earlier, that was if a dynamic behavioral structure is making people sick, how can it be understood so it can be changed and people can get well? I got a call in my office this week, a young man who's from Africa, and he is in advanced education, training for getting a second bachelor's degree. And he called my office from another state saying, "I have to talk to you. I'm about to have a nervous breakdown." And what did he describe was happening in his life? That he's the only black in this advanced science training program, and he is being treated so horribly by the people who classify themselves as white that he said, "I can't take it anymore." He said, I come from West Africa, and I've never experienced being made to feel that I'm supposed to be inferior to white people. I'm just trying to study science in this particular field and get an advanced degree. But every day I'm running into people saying things to demean and to humiliate me. I get calls. As a matter of fact, I just came back from the National Medical Association convention in Detroit, Michigan. That's the National Organization of Black Physicians. And a young person came to me who is in neurology, and this is a female physician, advanced training in neurology, and she came to me. I didn't know her, and she said, "You're Dr. Welsing, please let me hug you. Were it not for your book, The ISIS Papers, I would not have been able to endure the racism in the training program. And the fact that I completed it was because you helped me understand racism." I run into people all the time, people I'd never met before, Could be in the Safeway. Could be in an airport. Dr. Welsing, you saved my life. You helped me understand this thing that we call racism. And when I started writing, I thought maybe only 8 people, some other black psychiatrists who in the late 1960s were writing and talking about racism. I never thought that anybody other than those 8 other black psychiatrists were interested, because they too were looking at racism, but they were looking at it from a Freudian psychoanalytic vantage point. So there it is. And everybody should go out, if there are any more copies of the August issue of Ebony magazine. I just happened, this was here in the room where I am, the August issue of Ebony. And everybody, black person, ought to buy the magazine, tear the cover off, and put it in a frame. I'm going to do that. And I just happened to look at this. I bought the magazine, and the magazine cover is white. It has ebony and big black print, and then it has above that money, power, and respect. And then the cover that you have to look carefully to read, it says, America loves black people. And then it has a heart shaped over the O in love, and then it has culture written in purple. It's like America loves black people, and the people is covered over with the writing culture. Now, this is profoundly important, because when you say, Carol, why don't black people want to talk about racism? It's right on the August 2015 issue of Ebony magazine. Black people want to believe that America loves them.
All right, hold that thought right there, Doc. We got to step aside for a news report. 800-450-7876 to speak to Dr. Welsing. We're talking about race. We'll take your calls next on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
WOL.
Well, thank you for rolling with us this morning. And my guest is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. We are having a discussion on race, a discussion that folks don't want to talk about. So we've got to talk about it. We've got to figure out why. First, Dr. Welsing is helping us understand why we don't want to have the discussion. Before we left for the break, she was telling us about Ebony magazine and the cover of Ebony that says that America loves blacks, or loves our culture. But Dr. Welsing, race is itself, it is a race. I mean, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. So why would white folks, if they're in the pole position, want to give that up? Why should they want justice?
I'm sorry, say that again, Carl.
Why, because it is a race. That's what racism is. That means somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose, or if we can play to a draw, if you will. But why would white folks want to give up that position of being on top?
Well, again, I said that there is a reason why people who classify themselves as white want to be in power. It is because that's the only way they can genetically survive on this planet. Please listen carefully. Genetic survival is my thesis. And if anybody doesn't understand genetic survival, just look at President Obama. See, the very fact that all of this is right in front of our face. Genetic survival, the president's mother was white. She's deceased. His father was black. He's deceased. Black is a genetically dominant trait, not determined by Frances Welsing. This is the basic science of genetics. So anytime you mix black and white, black being dominant, white being a recessive genetic trait, the dominant rules. And so if all of the people were just relating based on the content of character, possibly white would disappear. White people do not want to disappear.
But
They
then again,
do not
Doctor,
want to disappear. I've asked audiences of white people, do you want your children to be colored? Do you want your grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-great-great-great-great-great-great? I'm polite, they're polite. They say no. And I say, well, on this particular planet, with the demographics such as they are, where whites are fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet, 9/10 of the people are black, brown, red, and yellow, meaning they all have melanin skin pigmentation. If everybody mixed, white would disappear. So if white doesn't want to disappear, then they strategically put themselves in a position of power through war, plunder, and otherwise until they are in the dominant position. Once they circumnavigated the planet and found out that they were a minority, genetic recessive. And the only way they can survive is to dominate and control people of color. The people who have most genetic power to cause white genetic annihilation are black people. That's why people all over the planet learn, if you are black, get back. If you are brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're white, you're right. People of color all over the world, regardless as to language spoken, all who have been under racism, white supremacy, and that's the whole globe, they learn that. And this is what we experience. And so even going to Charleston, South Carolina, and the massacre of the black people, the 21-year-old white male, Dylan Storm Roof, went into the black church, sat amongst them at the black people at a prayer meeting, and for an hour, they say, prayed and talked with them, got up and pulled out a gun and killed them. Killed 9 black people, 6 black women, and 3 black men. Stating with absolute clarity, I have to kill you because you are black. I have to kill you because black men want to rape white women. And so the TV makes it clear by putting Bill Cosby and the 40 women that he is supposed to have raped, most of white, puts that up in front of us day after day after day after day after day. Another white woman coming forward with her soft porn story. So right up in front of us, at the same time that black men are being killed in the street, and now black women as well. So Ebony has on its cover, America loves black people, overriding the word people is the word culture. That's the black fantasy, while black people are really in a state of being genocided. Now, I hadn't really looked until this moment, looked at this Ebony magazine and seen this powerful contradiction. So we are in a functional state of fantasy and the reality, because if you kill the men of a people, then you are engaging in genocide. So black people could rightly go to the UN and say again, we charge genocide. But genocide is the logical outcome anytime a group of people fear that they can be genetically annihilated. just by another group of people making love to them, then they will engage consciously and or subconsciously in the genocide of those people. And that's what we see happening to us as a people. But as Ebony says, America loves black people. That's what black people. So don't talk about racism, Dr. Welsing. You're destroying my dream. You're destroying my fantasy. I'm with Ebony Magazine, and I'm into the belief America loves black people, America loves black culture. What is black culture? Black people calling themselves niggers and gangsters and thugs and bitches and hoes. That's present-day black culture. Black people killing each other. That is black culture. Culture is what people are actually doing. And so America loves black people destroying themselves for white genetic survival.
All right, hold that thought right there.
Translation, Francis Welsing.
800-450-7876. Got to step aside for some announcements. We come back and speak with Dr. Welsing and take your phone calls as the big show rolls on from the capital city on 1450 WOL.
Real Talk Radio in the AM. Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
And thank you for staying with us. We're discussing race with Dr. Welsing, and she's breaking it down. So, tell some of the young people to wake up and listen and understand what she's saying. And hopefully everybody will get a better understanding of what racism is and how it works, how this system, this very complex system of white supremacy, how it engulfs just about everything that we have. You talked about mixed race people and using the president as an example, because most of us know somebody who's mixed race, and they seem to try to, they seem more conflicted than us, whether they're white or black, and they try to act white or stay in the black world. Most of them have a problem straddling that fence or which side they're going, even though physically, like the president, you see them, they're black, but there's a part of them, Dr. Welsing, that wants to love that white parent that they have. How do they deal with that?
Well, see, let's get this straight, first of all. 90% of black people in this part of the world are mixed race. We don't look like our ancestors in West Africa for the most part, because there has been a dilution of color because of the massive raping of African women by white slave masters in the hundreds of years of our enslavement. So we are mixed race. Everybody is mixed race. Now, if you talk about first-degree mixed race, meaning that the immediate mother, as opposed to the grandmother or the great-grandmother, or the great-grandfather. A patient was in my office talking about the picture of Ulysses S. Grant. This week. And the little black boy that was by the Civil War general, Ulysses S. Grant, was his patient's great-great-great-grandfather. And that it was from Ulysses S. Grant and some African women that he had impregnated. So mixed race is what black people in this part of the world, and all of the black people who are a part of the diaspora are mixed race. And so, yes, we have been miscegenated out of our minds in that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and people of color are taught to hate themselves. The television teaches if you're black, hate yourself. You see you're not there on the screen. You're not present. If you're present, you're clowning. I just saw a commercial with a black man jumping up and down with children grinning and clowning. That's the image of black men. White men look serious. They don't have their mouth open in a 50-piece grin. All of that is teaching black people, hate yourself, hate yourself. Can't be on television, hate yourself, hate yourself. So all of the people of color, the very fact that people don't want to talk about race. In other words, if something is harming you and you don't want to talk about what's harming you, then you are in a conscious and or subconscious state of self-hatred.
Doc, you go back to the television for a second. Is that why we don't see any dark-skinned or brothers with beards on TV? We usually, and I know there are some exceptions, but usually they're really light-skinned, what they call exotic-looking people that they use, whether they're covering the news or giving them these talk shows or whatever, or they got wavy hair, or and that's another aspect, the so-called good hair. Is that why we see that on TV? And is that what you say, we internalize that we want to be like that, and that's where the self-hatred comes from?
Well, do you see the system of racism, white supremacy teaches a black self-hate. It teaches us, some of the highest paid black people are the entertainers who are used to engage in psychological warfare against black people. So the entertainment, the so-called music, is talking about niggers and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs. That's, in this system of racism, white supremacy, those are the people who are rewarded most highly. You're willing to demean and degrade yourself. Some of the rap music talks about you don't want to be black. I had children in my office this month. Teenage children, 14, 12, 14. No, we don't like black. No, we don't like black. Where do they get this? You see all the black children who are walking around. I'm not black, I'm mixed race. They just forgot to add, I'm mixed because my great-grandparents were raped by the slave master. And so I don't have the highest level of melanin pigmentation because the grandmothers were raped, and we're so happy that our great-grandmothers were raped by white slave masters.
So when did that flip, though? Because there was a time that was looked down on. The mixed race, the light-skinned folks was like, well, somebody raped your mother, or some in your family somewhere. If you yellow, somebody there got in. Somebody got raped.
This used to be when in the immediacy of slavery. This was an embarrassment and a shame that they had been raped. And so the black people very often would say the offspring was because of Indian ancestry, mixture with Native Americans. That's how the hair got straight, as opposed to the African women. See, look at in the system of racism, white supremacy, parading Bill Cosby with all of his contacts with white women. And, it's kind of hard to say rape when it's consensual involvement. But talking about this black man raping a white woman, where our whole culture, all the black people who are not crystal black can say, I'm not crystal black because of the rape of my great-grandmothers. You see, so in other words, this is why it is important to delve into and try to understand scientifically at a deeper level what is this thing of racism, and to try to have enough self-respect and courage to talk about it, even though the system of racism, white supremacy, doesn't want us to talk about it, doesn't want us to be in touch with reality, and rather would have us in touch with fantasy, as on the cover of Ebony magazine.
All right, hold that thought right there, Doc.
WOL Radio and live around the world on WOLDCnews.com.
Thank you for staying with us. We're having a very candid conversation about race with psychiatrist Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, and the number to call to speak to her is 800-450-7876. Dr. Welsing, if what you're saying is true, that means that when we see these quote-unquote black-on-black crimes, the shootings we hear about in Chicago and L.A. and parts of D.C., and when we see that black folks, when they're in the supervisory position, and instead of hiring one of us, to hire somebody else, is all of this because of this system of white supremacy?
Yes, Carl. Yes. And I say that, in other words, in science, you try to dig deep and make an analysis so that you understand in depth whether it is cancer or whether it is a social phenomenon called racism, white supremacy. And so all of the things that we complain about as black people, see, in other words, if there's going to be white genetic survival, just as Dylan Roof laid out in Charleston, South Carolina, and in his manifesto, that when you say genetic survival, immediately you think about men. When we think about genetic annihilation, white genetic annihilation, because it's only males, whether they white, black, brown, red, or yellow, who can impose sexual intercourse. And so racism, white supremacy, the war for white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation is against black people in general, but black men in particular, because it is a war for genetic survival, the genetic survival of a recessive genetic trait. And so once the war is directed against black men, then you are impacting the structure of the black family. And so at this point in time, we end up with 2 million people incarcerated, most of whom are black men. Those are black men who have been removed from the community, taken from the family. So their families don't have functional husbands and fathers at the 70% level. And the sons are completely and totally frustrated, male children. And if one were seriously interested in black young people, black male young people, getting into crime, these are all children who want their fathers and are upset and hurt and depressed because fathers have been taken from their lives. See, just watch the defense for Dylan Roof, the person who killed 9 black people in the church, and watch his defense team begin to talk about his pain and frustration, and that's why he got involved in being an overt white supremacist, etc. Well, black male children are in pain. Black families are in pain because the fathers have been removed, and they are removed through unemployment. So where white unemployment might be at the 6% level, unemployment in the black community is at the 50% level, 30% level. And so the war of racism, white supremacy, the war for white genetic survival, impacts the family, impacts all of the family members, impacts black male, black female relations, determines whether black male children feel like they can succeed in school or whether they want to drop out, influences black female children wanting to be convinced that a male loves them, and so we end up getting teenage pregnancy because female children who don't have fathers who are showing them love want to be convinced that they are loved by a male person. So for those people who want to understand, like you said, in earlier discussions, that Dr. Welsing, a lot of people don't understand what you're talking about. And I would just say those are people who just, don't really want to understand racism in depth, and that's okay. That's just a position. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to understand it. My discussion is for those people who want to understand why we as black people are in pain, and based on the understanding, not just to keep complaining, but what can we do about it? How can we end this? And I say that, sometimes I've had white people ask me, Dr. Welsing, how is it? Like sometimes white people will say, well, what can I do to help? And I say, tell black people what white people talk about when there's no black people around. And the white person, no matter who they are, they go silent because what white people do, they are talking code about how do we maintain white supremacy for white genetic survival. So they don't reveal. Even when they're married to black people, they don't reveal what white people talk about when there's no black people around. You see, but other white people have said, well, Dr. Welsing, if you say that whites are a minority on the planet, how is it that as a white minority, planetary speaking, that we are able to control the planet? And I said, well, you could be that you're smarter, but I don't think so. I think that you have just been able to evolve a system once you realize that whites were a tiny minority on the planet, starting with the voyages of discovery, where they discovered that the majority of the people on planet Earth are people of color. And if the men had sex with those non-white women, they found out that the offspring looked like the mothers, that white disappears. And so from that point, evolving a power system dynamic so that white does not disappear, and that's the global system of racism, white supremacy, the system for white genetic survival. And of necessity, has to teach people of color, based on the level of coloration, that they are ugly and that that they're niggers and bitches and hoes and gangsters and thugs, and you don't deserve to appear on television, or you only deserve to appear in the movies in certain roles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or in textbooks. Your history is not told. So that is the system of domination, and to give black people an image of God that is the image of the oppressors themselves, the white image of God, and black people being taught to worship this. And only through the love of white people can they enter heaven.
Wow, hold that thought right there, Dr. Welsing.
Real Talk Radio in the AM. Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
Thank you for staying with us. And our guest, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. She's a psychiatrist. Many of you know her from the ISIS papers. But we're having a discussion about race. People don't want to talk about race, and Dr. Welsing explained why. But Dr. Welsing, explain to us, how can we survive in the system of white supremacy? What must we do to thrive in this system?
Well, I would say, in other words, this is the importance of analyzing and defining what it is that is the problem. And so then you organize your thinking and your behavior so as to solve the problem. And so if instead of people saying, I don't want to focus on racism, if racism is the problem, then you focus on racism in a constructive way through understanding it in depth. Just like if a person plays football successfully, it's because they understand the game in depth. And they don't take a tennis racket on the football field hoping to score. In other words, you have to understand something in depth. To play basketball well, you have to understand the game in depth. And so if we look at what racism, white supremacy is a problem, what exactly is it? How has it been able to be successful on planet Earth? And then developing, as Neely Fuller talks about, counter-racism strategies. Well, the first step is to understand what you're dealing with and to be able to analyze and look at, this is what we're dealing with. This is why we have problems in economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. This is why we can't get loans at the bank. This is why there's redlining of real estate in neighborhoods. This is why there's gentrification, moving black people out of urban centers as white people are moved in. This is why there's disparities in the delivering of justice in the courts. And so understanding why, and then how has this been put together? How has this edifice of oppression, how has it been put together? And so self-hatred, teaching black people to love white and hate themselves, teaching black people that God is white. God looks just like the oppressors, God and his mother, so-called. Whereas in reality, if Jesus was a historical figure, even Billy Graham was able to say he could not have been white. That's a part of the world where the people are basically black and shades of black. You see, so people begin to, once they begin to understand, and Neely Fuller, his work is about, it's almost like a chess manual for dealing with racism, white supremacy. These are behavior moves that black people need to make. But behavior moves in the context of understanding what you're dealing with, which is why Neely Fuller says if you don't understand white supremacy, racism, what it is and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. And that's why black people go around greeting each other saying, what's happening? Hey, what's happening? Because we don't understand what's going on. And we keep walking in a circle, marching in a circle, and not making progress because we don't understand what we're dealing with. But it is possible to understand. And for those who want to understand, they can move from having a clear definition of what racism is, a clear understanding, and understanding that focusing on black people to hate, as opposed to keep your eyes on the persons who are structuring and maintaining racism, white supremacy. Keep your eye on the people who classify themselves as white, not to engage in hate. I was on a blog radio program earlier this week, and a black woman called up and said, I have to hate them. I have to hate them based on what they've done. And I said, well, you know, hate is a strong emotion, but that's not necessarily constructive. And that the energy, I say, the energy would be better spent if black people, first of all, looked in the mirror and decided that they were going to like and respect their black self and other people who look like them, because a minority is able to control a majority through divide and conquer. And so Neely Fuller laid out some behaviors that I've called exercises in black mental health and black self-respect. He calls them counter-racism, white supremacy. Stop name-calling one another. Stop gossiping about one another. Stop squabbling with one another. Stop snitching on one another, informing on one another for reasons of personal gain. Stop cursing one another. Stop being discourteous to one another. Stop being disrespectful to one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop fighting one another. Stop killing one another. Now, these are behaviors that, in other words, racism, white supremacy is a behavioral edifice. It's how people think, speak, and act towards a particular goal objective. People who classify themselves as white. That's, you know, when the person says, I am white, that statement means consciously and or subconsciously, I am a member of a tiny global minority population. We are genetic recessive to the vast majority of the people on the planet, and we can be genetically annihilated. And so, therefore, we must engage in certain specific behaviors. Anderson Cooper on CNN had a program some months ago showing when do children learn about race, and had 3-year-old white children, 3 years of age, having been schooled in racism, white supremacy. So if shown a series of faces from, you know, black to white, a 3-year-old white child, you say, which one is ugly? Immediately, without hesitation, points to the black image. Although the faces are the same, but they're just different colors of the racial spectrum. Which one do you not want to be friends with? Its child points to black. You know, which one is bad? The child points to black. Well, the children learn this just like they learn English language. If English is spoken in the home, then that's what they learn.
All right, hold that thought right there, Doctor. We got to step away for a couple of announcements. When we come back, also, I want you to expand on that and tell us what we do with the sellouts in our community, the Uncle Toms, some of the boulets or the bourgeoisie will be in the town condition. How do we handle those? 800-450-7876. I will take the calls, promise you. Right after this short break on 1450. So first on hold, we will get you. And so I want you to put your questions, put your statements in a question form for Dr. Welsing so she can respond. So forego the statements for today. Just put it in the question form because we're in learning mode right now in the classroom. Dr. Welsing, before the break, I'm going to let you finish up what you were saying, but also tell us, how do we deal with the people in our community that we deem the sellouts, the Uncle Toms?
I mean, Carl, it's like we can say we're all sellouts. In other words, the total system of racism, white supremacy, if you're not going to cooperate with it 100%, then go into Safeway, fill up your cart, and walk out the door without paying. When you stop at the cashier with the money that you got on your JOB, with the images of white faces on it, do you see? So we are all under the system of racism, white supremacy, and at one level or another in cooperation with it. And so, see, what tragically happens is when people are oppressed and they are afraid to keep a steady gaze on the oppressor, then they start focusing on each other. So the black man who is discriminated on his job and humiliated, and he can't say anything to the boss and at the same time keep his job, and so then he comes home and curses his wife or yells at his children. So when A causes B and B causes C, and if you focus on anything other than A, you're showing a sign of weakness. So black people, do you see, in other words, any black person who, I've been critical of President Obama and some of the things that I think that he ought to be doing that he's not doing in focusing on racism. Do you see? But any other black person, including myself, if I was probably in that position under the system of racism, white supremacy. Well, Francis Welsing, either you do this or you can be killed, or your family can be killed. You see, just like they've said in so many words, President Obama, we can let anybody in this White House that we want. Drones can fly over, bullets can go into the living quarters, people can climb over the fence, not stopped. Basically, buddy, you don't really have high-level security, and you can be killed at any time. So Neely Fuller has talked about 4 modes that people who are under a system of oppression and the victims of oppression, that they can respond in 4 modes. They can submit to it, meaning, I don't want to deal with racism. I don't want to hear about it. Give me some alcohol. Give me some marijuana. Give me some medical marijuana. And let me just float on away so I don't even have to think about it. It's too much for me. That's submission. Cooperation with means, I know it's there, but let me just get a good job and buy a car and then maybe get a boat or 2. And that's what I want out of it. And then there's resistance, meaning that people are aware that it's a problem and they will try to resist it as best as they can with some of their life energy. And then there's destruction of, and those are the black people who have already given their lives. Those are the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's and the Medgar Evers and all the people who died in behalf of moving against the injustice of racism, white supremacy. So my advice would be, as Neely Fuller said, if you want to find an Uncle Tom, just look in the mirror. That person you see brushing your teeth is at some level cooperation with the system of racism, white supremacy. So we don't need to focus on each other with excessive energy other than to maybe lament, but try to keep the focus on racism, white supremacy. See, which we have a very hard time doing, a very, 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 very hard time focusing on racism, white supremacy, and not wasting energy with hate. See, if somebody wants to win a chess tournament, they can't let their emotions of frustration overtake them. They have to try to master what moves are being made on the white side of the chessboard that opens the game, and what moves need to be made on the black side, playing defense, offense. And so if we understand racism as a behavioral system construct and decide. People can decide, because if, as the white people who might say, Dr. Welsing, how is it as 1/10 of the population we can control the 9/10? I say, if you taught the 9/10 to hate themselves, so that the 9/10 are using their energy upholding white supremacy, whether they understand it or not. I mean, anytime a black person says, I don't want to marry a dark person, I want to marry a light-skinned person, they are upholding racism, white supremacy, even though that's their choice. Do you see what I'm saying? And so, there are many things. I want my children to have good hair. That means straight hair, like white hair. Oh, I want to have straight hair, so I go and buy some Asian hair, because I don't want to look black. That's upholding racism, white supremacy, even though the person doesn't realize it, because people are not thinking about system of racism and how all these behaviors add up. And people don't need to condemn themselves. It's just a question of beginning to understand. But if the non-white people on this planet that constitute the vast majority, if they would refuse to kill each other, racism, white supremacy would fall apart within a matter of hours. It's just like if black people decided, well, first and foremost, we have to understand racism, white supremacy, which is why people who classify themselves as white try to prevent a discussion and understanding of racism, white supremacy, because then the people of color, black people, might just get smart enough, oh, this is what's happening. Well, then this is what I need to do on the black side of the chessboard. I need to start practicing these codified counter-racist behaviors that Neely Fuller suggested. Start fighting one another and start killing one another. See, for all of the newspaper articles about black-on-black homicide, and here's Neely Fuller had written back in the 1950s some behaviors that black people practiced. It would counter racism. Why isn't that publicized?
All right, that's a good question. Hold that thought right there, Doc. We got to step aside for a news report. Folks, you too can join the conversation with Dr. Francis Cress Welsing discussing race. 800-450-7876. We'll take your calls after this news report on 1450.
Your voice can now be heard.
Y'all ready?
Yeah. With Carl Nelson weekdays from 6 to 10 a.m. on 1450 WOL.
And thank you for staying with us, folks. Class is in session. Time to raise your hand. You can raise your hand by dialing 800-450-7876. You have a question for Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. We'll discuss racism. Let's go to line 3. Don's in D.C. Don, your question for Dr. Welsing.
Dr. Welsing, I've been calling you a Neely Fuller for years. Recently, Dr. Fuller was on there, Neely Fuller was on there, and to take white supremacy to another level, he had a challenge or a disagreement with one of the callers, and he was saying that white supremacy globally, nationally or globally, he said, does it pertain to China? Because he says China, as far as China is involved, do they rule over China? And, of course, Russians are Caucasian. So do they rule over Jews or Caucasian? And it comes to, like China owns a lot of property or they say China owns America, or do it comes to whoever has the strongest guns? As far as I don't know whether China have weapons.
Right. I remember that call, Don, and basically, Dr. Wilson, I think it was one of our callers from New York was saying that China is a world-class power now. So how come does white supremacy affect them?
Yeah, the guy was challenging Dr. Neely Fuller, and they were going in circles, and the show
All right,
ended.
let's give Dr. Welsing a chance to respond, Don. Thank you for your call.
Uh-huh.
The system is racism, white supremacy, and the Chinese people are not classified by the people who classify themselves as white people. It's just like in Nazi Germany. As far as black people might be concerned, the people who are called Semites of the Jewish religion looked white. Adolf Hitler said they were not white, and so there would be no mistake about who they are. He made them put yellow stars on their outer garment so that the German people, white, would realize these are not white people according to Adolf Hitler. White is the operative word. So either you're classified as white. When you look at the census, and it has all the different categories, and white is there unadorned. So all the other categories, I don't care what they are, meaning non-white. You're not white.
Well, the question was between Neely Fuller and the guys. Neely Fuller was saying white supremacy controls all, and the guy said, no, you don't control China. And so they were going in circles. And
well, next time Mr. Fuller is on, then you can take that up with him.
Yeah, because the program ended. Then, and another question is, when we have the Power 1 and Power 2, they should have workshops or sessions. These are the people who are concerned, and these are the people who are involved by your literature and books and listen to the speakers, and the people you want to come together and start what we're supposed to be doing, as far as maybe you and Neely Fuller and your concepts can come. You be there, or concept be there, and we can plan programs after these Power 1, Power 2, and Power 3 sessions, instead of having speakers there speaking very intelligently, and then we separate. How do we get back together? I mean, you could have somebody there from the Nation of Islam or other organizations and do some planning. And so this is one of the questions I would like to know, and why we do this over and over again. It's over. We get the books. Let's have workshops, and these people can come. Certain days have workshops,
All right, let me stop you there because we got some other people. I'll respond to that for Dr. Welsing, because there are some workshop plans, and Tony Brown is going to address that, but he's out of the country. He's in Egypt. So when
I have an institute that I've had for over 20 years.
Yes, I've been.
It meets the second Thursday of every month. No charge, and the discussion is racism, white supremacy.
Yeah,
and
but
where does that meet, Dr. Welsing?
Yeah, this was a big, gathering of Power 1 and Power 2, and they could have, you could have had more people at the joint workshops, this.
Yeah, but we don't want to discuss that right now. We want to move on. People want to talk about. You can talk about any other time. So there's a bunch of people been holding, just as you've been holding.
Keep it so long. Have a good
questions.
Day. Huh?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. 800-450-7876. Again, that's the number to call to speak to Dr. Welsing. Now, let me just say, if you've ordered your Power Talk DVDs, you should be getting them in the mail, unless you're overseas, or a bunch of folks are overseas. Those are going to take a little bit longer for them to get. You have a question for Dr. Welsing? 800-450-7876. Line 6 is Ernest in Baltimore. Ernest?
Good evening. Good morning, and it's an honor to speak to you. But I often hear you say that that the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, are Semitic people. However, Dr. Aaron L. Hick, a geneticist at Hopkins University, and Dr. Oppenheimer from the Hebrew University say that they're not Semitic people. They are descendants of the Khazars, and they are not the people of the book. Matter of fact, it's been said that the people of the book, the Palestinians, are descendants of the ancient Israelites, some of the Palestinians. And they also said that the Lemba tribe, who is in South Africa, who are African people, black people, who practice Judaism in the ancient ways, are black people. They didn't know anything about white people. So how do we have this discussion that they are Semitic people when so many other people say that they're not? And they have one person that says that they have Arthur Kessler wrote a book called The 13th Tribe. Benjamin Freeman, who is a Jewish industrialist, in 1947, he wrote gave a statement to the world at the UN or wherever it was, some major body, Benjamin Freeman, that gave the reason why that the German people hated this Khazarian people because of the things that they had done. They had
right, Ernest, we get the gist of what you're saying. Let's give Dr. Frances Cress Welsing a chance to respond to what you're saying, and thank you for your phone call.
See, what I was saying was I was giving an example of racism, white supremacy, as conducted in Europe against the people that Adolf Hitler said were not white people. That was my discussion. I'm not discussing, the ins and outs of who is a Jew. I said Adolf Hitler said that the Semites of the Jewish religion, and thus the word anti-Semitism, that he said they weren't white, and that therefore he made them wear yellow stars because he wanted Europe to be white and pure. So I'm not in the discussion about Semites, who is and who isn't. I'm talking about racism, white supremacy, how it has been conducted in other places, and this is the dynamic that is impacting us.
All right, hold on thought, Dr. Welsing. We've got to step aside for a couple of announcements. 800-450-7876 to speak to Dr. Welsing discussing race. Your call's next on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Real Talk Radio in the AM. Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
And thank you for staying with us and discussing racism, how and what to do when we're confronted with racism, how to deal with it, how to survive, how to thrive in this system of white supremacy. So let's put it in a question form, and don't let that system of white supremacy get you thinking about something else. 800-450-7876. Go to line 2. Mr. Richardson is joining us from Chevy Chase, Maryland. Mr. Richardson, you have a question for Dr.
Yes,
Wilson?
thank you, Carl, so much. And it's so nice speaking with Frances again. She's one of the people that knows what she's talking about. But, Carl, I don't know why you didn't mention to Dr. Frances this about the Reuben character that Dylan Ruth or whatever his name is, that killed all those people in that church, like the doctor was saying. Now, all this money
Dr. Wilson is still with us, Ms. Richardson. Direct your question to her.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I was just trying to incite that what you had already brought up several days ago pertaining to that man, the young man that, did what he did in the church, Doctor. And what is your opinion, Doctor, about a couple of things here about the young man and all this money being raised on behalf of other white clientele, if you will, to help him? And all of this stuff coming from, I know, white racism. Okay, but what I cannot understand, this is a twofold, then I'm off. I'm not trying to beat on our people, but it's something that has to be said. Why are they keep asking for forgiveness to white people when they know what has happened to all of these black people in New York, Chicago, North Carolina, on and on and on and on, and it goes back to slavery. We know where it stems from, Doctor. You know, you and I know both. We're both up in age now, and we both still, thank God, we're still here, and we have some kind of reasonable mind. Why is it that our people still have this notion, oh, they'll love us someday? You know, I'll hang up. God bless you, Doctor. You're a wonderful lady, and thank you, Carl.
All right. Good question, Ms. Richardson. Why do we think that they're going to turn around? That's basically what she's going to say.
Well, I would just say that we are mistaken in terms of maybe the stumbling over the word love. My thesis is that the people who classify themselves as white are engaged in their genetic survival. It's not about love or not love. They are engaged in a system for their genetic survival on this particular planet, third planet from the sun, that has an overwhelming majority of people who have skin coloration, and that is a genetically dominant state compared to the genetic recessive state of skin whiteness. And so if everybody just melded together and everybody really loved, white would disappear. So that, therefore, if the whites don't want to disappear, they can't engage in the concept that black people may talking about love. It would be a contradiction. And this is why it's important, in my view, to understand the racism, white supremacy mindset that was clarified for anybody who's confused by Dylan Storm Roof in Charleston, South Carolina, when he said, I have to kill you because you are black. 1. 2, black men want to have sex relations with white women. Dylan Roof said rape. That would portend white genetic annihilation. So he laid it out.
Let me interrupt you and ask you this, Dr. Welsing. Ms. Richardson talked about love. What about black people who fall in, quote unquote, fall in love with white people and want to marry them?
Well, do you see, I just talked to, all these cases come up in your office as a psychiatrist. Somebody asked me, a black woman, well, this was called in the radio. A black woman was upset because her daughter announced to the parents that she was in a relationship with a white male. And the black mother was extremely upset and felt that I raised my children to respect themselves and to love black. And I simply asked the parent, did your daughter go to a white school at a very early age? And she said yes. And I said, and the parents placed the child in that school. Well, just taking the example that was on CNN about how early children learn about race. White children learn about race very, very, very early, because it's a survival issue, consciously and or subconsciously. So they learn about, they are taught it. So you have a black child, let's say 5 years of age, in a school with little white children. The little white children are going to make it clear that they're not white. And the teacher's going to make it clear that the black child is not white. So any child is just like somebody in prison where the warden has control over their existence. Then the person starts hoping the warden will like them and identifying with the warden. Stockholm Syndrome. And so the child that has been conditioned from a very early age, 3 years of age, to be the one little black person in a white setting, and the white setting is teaching racism. And so the black child without even being able to discuss it with the parents. I want to be accepted. All children want to be accepted. Children want to be accepted in their families. And so this is who I learned to love more than I love myself, which is no different than putting black children in front of the television.
Right.
And because they don't see their image, then they want to be the image that is acceptable to be on television.
Right. Hold that thought right there, because we have a traffic report coming up for our folks in the DMV. 800-450-7876. Your questions on race. We'll take them next.
Welcome to the Carl Nelson Show on Washington, D.C.'s 1450 WOL Radio and live around the world on WOLDCnews.com.
Thank you for staying with us. Class is open again, and the teacher is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. You can raise your hand by calling 800-450-7876, and all we ask that you ask a question so she can respond. Can't respond to statements. It's just put in a question form. Let's go to line one. Paul is calling us from London. Paul, you're on with Dr. Welsing. You have a question for her.
And it's not to be impolite, but it's very difficult to raise the curtain without making a in terms of race, my observation is with
I tell you what, Paul, I tell you what, I'm going to put you on hold and see if we can get a better line, because your line is breaking up real bad. 800-450-7876. Go to line 5. Mike's calling us from Columbus. Mike, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Thanks for taking my call. My question to Mr. Francis, what do we do about these faith-based churches where we attend? How do we get them to start repair centers to teach us to believe in ourselves and rise ourselves out of stop being like white people? Because most of the time, that's what's going on. They train us to be like them, and that's where the problem lies. We have to stop trying to be like white people. When we see that these people in this system, nothing but self-destruction, dropping nuclear bombs, killing one another, people starving. This is the system we live in, and we know that this ain't nothing but self-destruction and terrible times for all of us, all mankind. And then we see it, wars and rumors of wars. This is the type of system we want to live in, where there's really no justice. Black men and black women, quit trying to be like them. We become like them, and we give big respect, thinking that they're going to give us something special. There's nothing special.
Mike, what's your question? What's your question, Mike?
My question is, again, about the churches. How do we change the churches from preaching these lies, these faith-based churches, where we pour our money into, and get them to start repair centers?
All right, let's get a chance to respond. Thanks, Mike. Dr. Welsing, the churches.
Well, I would say instead of thinking about attacking the churches, in other words, his point of view, if he feels that the churches are teaching something that supports racism, white supremacy, think about his power as an individual person. See, he has acquaintances, he has family members, he talks to people, I'm making that assumption, every day. And so the African proverb that says, each one teach one, see himself as a leader, see himself as a human being that has power of intention, and so he can talk to the people that he knows and share his ideas and share his thinking, as opposed to, I'm going to attack this black church. No. Think about what you can do spreading a different kind of thinking or a different kind of understanding as an individual.
All right. 800-450-7876. I want to thank you, Mike, calling us from Columbus, for your phone call. Let's take another call. This time, let's go to line 4. Charles is with us from Chicago. Charles, you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Yes, thank you very, very much, Carl, for taking my call. You're the greatest talk show host, and thank you, Kathy Hughes, for having the baddest radio station for black people on this planet. I echo what the other brother usually said. Anyway, thank you very much, the Honorable Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. I wanted to talk to you, converse with you about your colleague. I remember you made a statement that you were the only psychiatrist out there that's trying to enlighten black people or talking about racism and white supremacy. And what I encountered in Cuba, when I was in Cuba not too long ago, I encountered one of your colleagues, and this is what the crux of it is. How do we change these upper elite folks that have made it? Now they're doctors, lawyers, whatever the case may be, black folks. But I asked them today, this one sister, and did she know anything about youth? And when she had revealed to me that she was a psychiatrist, and I said, "Oh, have you ever heard of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing?" So I was proud of her, and she immediately embarrassed me for all these white folks, saying that you are Afrocentrists, and what I'm gonna do, pull out my black card, which I wish I had never went on that trip anyway, because it turned out to be more white folks than I was somewhat deceived out of the African cultural diaspora mess or whatever that they called it, and they tricked black folks to go on that trip anyway. How do we? Because it's amazing to me. Even Dr. George M. James says in his book that we should disband all these sorority and fraternity groups that's being taught against themselves. So how do we navigate to have them to start getting on our side so that we can start coming together? And I think that's what one of the brothers at Columbus, Ohio was saying. How do we unite? Because if you're thinking on a single level, that's good. But like Malcolm says, if you put your fists together, then you hit together. Or Dr. Claude Anderson used to say, uniting and coming together from an aggregate level. So, and then, please hear me out here. Then we began to talk about another discussion with another group that was from Baltimore, educators, and they began to talk about how far you were out there, or she's really out there, or Dr. Pat somebody, I forgot what who she is. But they began to talk about how you guys are out there, and I'm like, wait a minute. They're talking about racism, white supremacy. And it was on the premise that we were there fighting the Cubans right there in a restaurant that didn't want us blacks to be seated, my wife and two other blacks. So we united, and then we went on had to have a big meeting with them in Cuba about how bad we were treated and insulted, that they were seating the white people in Cuba at this restaurant. It wouldn't seat us. These are things we encountered.
All right, let's give her a chance to respond. Thanks, Charles. Again, had to deal with the bourgeoisie and the other folks, the upper crust. It's the 10 percenters, if you will. Dr. Welsing.
Again, I would say that do not ignore the power of how do we get a large number of people. I would say, sharing ideas, but not being angry with the other people. Focus on the system of racism, white supremacy, even as an individual. One black individual who says, I'm going to understand racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. And I understand with my one person, if I say I'm not going to name call another black person, I'm not going to gossip about another black person, I'm not going to be discourteous or disrespectful to another black person, I'm not going to be squabbling with another black person, I'm just going to do that, or I'm going to not throw down trash where black people live, work, and play. I'm going to try to encourage black children to stop thinking as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. I'm not going to engage in the denial of racism, white supremacy. My one person moving around in relationship to other people am going to respect the power of my life energy. I'm going to use it in that way. And so I will share my ideas. I mean, I'm saying that this is what you can do. The fact that other psychiatrists have not been talking about racism, white supremacy, did not deter me from not talking about it.
Oh, yeah, understood. Understood, Dr. Chris. Dr. Francis,
right.
understood.
Thanks, Charles.
You see, even though people would be upset, there goes Welsing again talking about racism, white supremacy. And then we stumble upon Charleston.
Okay, hold that thought right there, Doc. I'll let you finish on the other side. Folks, you too can get in on the conversation with Dr. Welsing. Reach out to us at 800-450-7876. Your calls. Answer this traffic report on 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Real talk radio in the AM. Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
And thank you for rolling with us this morning, discussing race, racism, the system of white supremacy. As Neely Fuller says, if you don't understand it, everything else will just confuse you. And you're judging from the conversation, many of us are still confused. Our guest is Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, I'm going to let you finish up your response to the last call before I take another call for you.
Carl, let me just throw this in. You know, if I had a new dance step to teach, and I said, this is the latest dance step, no black person would say, how are all of the black people in this area of the world going to learn the dance step? We teach it immediately to each other, so that the dance step in 3 days moves from the East Coast to the West Coast, or from the West Coast to the East Coast. Any new slang, any gossip, the latest thing in sex, the latest joke, people have no trouble sending that like wildfire across the black world. But when it comes to something that is reflective, deeply reflective of our respect for ourselves as black people, we stumble and we wonder how am I going to make these? No. We have been taught to make things that are irrelevant, inconsequential, or really things that are negative to our interest. And so just looking at that and say, wow, that's fascinating, that anything that is negative, anything that is destructive, we can pass like wildfire. Let's introduce self-respect, and let's pass amongst ourselves something that might help us answer the question that every black person raises when they meet another black person. Hey, what's happening? Well, what's happening is the system of racism, white supremacy. And we are the victims of that system. And to the extent that our self-respect moves into courage, we can begin to understand that system, not wasting our time hating white people, but structuring our behavior so that racism, white supremacy comes to an end. If the non-white people on the planet, from Asia to Africa to India, to all of the Caribbean islands, South America, if all of the black people decided that they were going to respect themselves as people of color on the planet, and all throughout India they weren't going to engage in color discrimination, and all throughout South America and Central America that color discrimination was going to come to an end amongst people of color themselves, that we were going to have respect for ourselves and all the shades of black that we now come in. And we were not going to fight and kill each other under no set of circumstances. Racism, white supremacy would come to a screeching halt. Now, that's the power, because it takes people of color all over the planet being willing to fight and kill each other. That is essential to maintain racism, white supremacy on planet Earth at this particular point in time.
All right, 800-450-7876. Let's go to Paul in London again. Hopefully his line's a lot better. Paul, you have a question for Dr. Frances Cress Welsing.
Yeah, hi. I hope you can hear me. I hope this line's a bit better. Living in America for a while, I was born in England, but living in America for a while, the observation which I got was that there's a difference between the type of racism I feel we face in America and the racism which we find in England. The racism in America, to me, is very extreme. It's, some things which I thought was non-existent. I mean, I've never heard of a man in my lifetime being hanged from a tree in England. I've never heard that. Well, as far as I know, that's never happened. Or a black man being dragged from the car. It seems to be more extreme. One of the reasons I think that might be, I don't know, is that those Europeans which live in the country you call America came there as invaders. And really maybe somewhere in their psyche they realize it's not really their land. And we do know that there were black people already in America before Europeans come. So the question I'm asking is, why is the racism more extreme in America than it is in Britain, where you would expect it to be worse here, being that you're dealing with is the children of the ancestors of the people who live here. Why is it so much worse in America?
Okay, my answer to that would be that there's a greater percentage of black people in this area of the world, percentage compared to whites, than there is on the continent. Do you see? But it's like any black person that goes to England. I've been in England, and the hostility towards black people is present there, but you just simply don't have the numbers. And as the numbers increase, the level of racism, white supremacy immediately felt by the people there, that also increases. Just like the number of people of color going into France or going into Norway or going into Sweden or going into Belgium, the more the non-white people go into the countries, the greater the racism, white supremacy is experienced, and the more people start waving Nazi flags.
Yeah, I understand what you say, but all I say, in London where I live, I understand that the non-white people is close, moving to almost 50%. It's 40-something%. So it's very high. But still, I've never heard of a person of color being hanged from the tree or dragged from behind the vehicle. So, it's very strange to me how it's so much worse there in America. And even now, things we're hearing now, we thought I thought we're left in the past. So I don't really understand where the root of this is coming from.
Carl, can you please repeat the question? He doesn't.
He says he doesn't understand where he's coming from, where the racism that he sees in the United States. I guess he's saying his whites are better than our whites, basically.
No, I know he couldn't be saying that.
Well,
I'm saying that humorously.
Right.
In other words, just because England did not have slavery on that little tiny island, and the English people had to come to America and have their slave plantations, you have a different kind of situation, as I said.
All right, hold that thought, Doctor. I'll let you respond on the other side. Paul, thank you for your call.
Real Talk Radio in the AM.
The #1 morning show. #1 on everybody list.
Carl Nelson on 1450 WOL.
And thank you for listening to us on against Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. And the number to call to speak to Dr. Welsing, just raise your hand, have a question ready, 800-450-7876. Dr. Welsing, we'll let you finish up responding to Paul's question from London. And part of the problem is because he lives in London, which is like any metropolitan area, which, it's not really symbolic of the total country. But I'll let you respond to his question.
You see, or just look at, in other words, the gentleman probably came from one of the Caribbean islands, so his family came from that area. And just look at where they might not have had the lynching and castrations that they had in the United States, but they've had the horrible mistreatment of black people in the colonies of the British Empire.
All right, let's take some more calls for you. 800-450-7876. Line 3, Saluki is calling us from Minneapolis.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Welsing, Brother Kyle. How you doing?
Good morning.
You know, I had a question, and you had kind of touched on it when one of those evangelists had mentioned that Jesus couldn't have been white from the area he came from. And, you know, when you look in the Bible, it describes him as being black and having hair like wool. But when you try to talk, every time I try to talk to a Christian about the importance of his ethnicity and his color, they argue with you tooth and nail about it. And I was wondering, what is the psychology behind that?
This is just in terms of our victimization by racism, white supremacy. In other words, black people, we have been enslaved by the system of racism, white supremacy, and taught that white is value and that black is not value. And so, you know, when this is taught for hundreds of years and it's continually taught, each time you turn on the television, each time you open a magazine, each time you open a newspaper, each time you open a book, it's taught 24/7 with intensity. Then people think like that until they are helped to think, you know, change their mind or change their thinking.
Mm-hmm. But why are the black ministers teaching that it's not important?
Well, because they are part of just like all of us. See, what percentage of black people want to talk about racism, white supremacy? That's not even at the 50% level. So why should the ministers want to talk about it when the majority of black people don't want to talk about it? So I say the answer is, for each person that thinks it ought to be talked about, then they talk about it and exercise the power of the one. See, in other words, if other people are not going to do it, and I think it ought to be done, then I will do it. If nobody else wants to stop name-calling, then I will do it. And realize that the power of one person deciding that this is what they are going to do, and that one person, because they keep doing it, they become like a laser, and they will have an effect. One person in a group of 10 people who will not carry gossip will have an impact on that group. One person who decides that they're going to be courteous and respectful. And so I say exercise the power of the one. And one of the most important things that I think that individual black people can do is refusing to engage in the denial of racism, white supremacy. That's a profound stroke in the direction of black mental health. Because as long as people refuse to talk about reality because they are afraid to do so, then that group of people is limping along, functioning in fantasy. And I really am going to say over and over again, go out and buy every copy of Ebony magazine, August 4, 2015, when at the same time that black people are marching in the street, young black people talking about Black Lives Matter, Ebony magazine has on its cover, America loves black people, and America loves black culture. Now that's as far when people are being genocided, to have a major magazine that black people purchase have on its cover in bold black and white that America loves black people and loves black culture. But the young people are being killed and having to be out in the street talking about Black Lives Matter. Because they are being treated as though black life does not matter. And that's in direct contradiction to this most important black magazine, or used to be black-owned, saying America loves black people. See, just going out and getting this magazine and studying the cover, and black people talking amongst themselves, this is interesting. This is interesting. This is what contributes to our confusion. This is what contributes to the confusion of our children, who are being not only denied opportunity, but denied life itself. And we are calling that love. Like there used to be an expression, a good end is a dead end. N-word.
Eight 800-450-7876. Let's keep rolling for calls for Dr. Welsing. Let's take another call. Let's go to, I think it's line 2, K.O. in D.C. K.O.?
Thank you. The world's greatest talk show host with the world's greatest talk show. And now you got on the world's greatest psychiatrist. Dr. Welsing, I just want to say, first of all, we can't thank you enough for your whole life of doing this fight. And sometimes, people might not disagree, but that don't mean that we don't love you to death, okay?
I'll remember that.
Yeah, I'm saying I had your book in 1970.
I'll remember that. Thank you.
I had your book in 1977, and you used to go up to Howard and see your lectures here. People didn't hear you tell them, that brother didn't hear you tell them that you give your lectures every month. So they could have, workshop already exists. But anyway, I got two things I want to say real quick. First thing is this guy, Dylan Roof, whatever his name is, Dylan Storm Roof. I understand that his grandfather is supposed to be a judge in North Carolina whose name is Storm, where he got his middle name from. And I understand his grandfather is supposed to be the guy who started the white supremacist group called Stormtroopers, supposed to be close to 100,000 across the country. And that, to me, that's very, very important. His middle name is Storm, and his granddaddy's last name is Storm, so he's connected to that white supremacy. But my question about, there's a lot of confusion on this issue of Jews and white supremacy. Now, I know what Mr. Fuller says and know what you say, but...
Right, hold those questions for a second, Brother K.O. I'll let you pose the questions on the other side. We've got to step aside for a couple of announcements. 800-450...
Genetic survival, we got that. But then you got this group who calls themselves Jews, who dominate publishing. You mentioned the magazine. They dominated publishing of media forever, and they dominate the input into that media, what goes in, and the mind, the thinking of the people in academic books as well as other things. So the state of Israel, do they consider themselves white? I mean, so something needs to be cleared up. And I think what I think, I'm just a dummy. Seems to me, white supremacy as a system exists, but genetic survival may be so. But there seem to be manipulators of that who are above all of that. And I think it may...
All right, in the interest of time, Kale, because we're racing the clock now, let's give it a chance to respond.
That's it. Okay.
And repeat the question one more time.
In other words, does the state of Israel consider them, do people that run in Israel, do they consider themselves white? Are they trying to protect white genetic survival? The so-called Jews in the slave trades, the ones who hate Farrakhan, the ones who manipulate the banking, all these powerful people who call themselves, from Rothschilds on down, are they considered, I mean, the Nazi, like Dick Gregory say, the Nazi part ain't controlling nothing. So we got to get clear on this.
All right, well, let's give it a chance to clear it up.
And so-called Jews part in it.
All right. Thanks, K.O. Dr.
Well,
Welsing.
see, in other words, what is my topic? My topic is a system of racism, white supremacy. And if the system says that a group of people are not white at one point, and then if they say they are white at another point, that's the prerogative of the power of the system of racism, white supremacy. So I have seen statements from leadership in Israel that it is a white state. And so the question simply goes to those who run the system of racism, white supremacy. It's like Hispanic people who have come to the United States as immigrants. At one point, they were classified as non-white, and then the system can change and say, well, now we put them into the white classification. And the only requisite is that they act white towards the people who are classified as non-white. And so people changing their classification or seeking to change their classification. We had large numbers of black people post-slavery who were miscegenated products of slave masters who thought, I'm going to pass for white. I think I'm light enough, and I'm going to pass for white, and if I can get away with passing for white, I'm going to be white. But if I'm white, that means I have to behave as though I'm white.
All right, let's take another call for you. 800-450-7876. Line 4, Shakur is calling us from Warren, Ohio. Shakur, your question for Dr.
Good morning,
Wilson.
Brother Carl. Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Your question for Dr. Welsing.
Yes, I just first want to say peace and blessings. Thank you for all your work, Carl and Dr. Welsing. My question is, I was having a conversation with a very wise brother, and we was talking about racism, white supremacy, and he told me, well, he was trying to explain to me that racism, white supremacy, the way that we're looking at it is an outdated model, and that what we should not confuse racism, white supremacy with is global capitalism. And he was trying to explain to me that racism is not all white supremacists are racist, and that it was a difference between the two. And so my question for Dr. Francis Cress Welsing is, what is the relationship or the correlation between white supremacy and global capitalism?
Okay. Remember my definition of racism, white supremacy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that it covers economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And so under economics, a system can call itself capitalist, socialist, communist, but it's under the umbrella of racism, white supremacy. That's like in politics. A group can call itself Republicans and Democrats and be simply the opposite conservative and liberal wings of white supremacy. So in trying to understand a total system, it's looking for what is the common denominator. What is going on despite a specific word usage? For example, gentrification. Now that word can just simply stand, oh, this is gentrification. Gentrification under the system of racism, white supremacy means the removal of black people from urban centers and bringing in people who are classified as white and raising the cost of apartments and rentals at a level that black people cannot afford and changing the whole landscape. So words, what do words are used, but what do they ultimately mean in a given power context? So, again, economics under white supremacy could be called capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, but it means white supremacy, racism, white supremacy. And for the most part, all you have to do is look at the faces on the money.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thanks, Shakur. Thanks for your call. 800-450-7876. Go to line 1. Roots in Maryland. Roots, your question for Dr. Francis Cress Welsing.
Good morning. Good morning, Brother Carl. Good morning, Dr. Welsing.
Good morning.
You had mentioned a monthly, if I'm not mistaken, seminar that you keep these discussions. Is it possible to get some details on, exactly when and where that takes place?
Yes, I have a monthly lecture series from September through June, and the place that the lectures are held is Howard University Blackburn Center.
Okay.
And it's free to the public, second Thursday of every month, September through June, 7 to 10 p.m.
Okay. Okay,
right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roots. 800-450-7876. Let's go to line 5. Rick's calling us from Ontario, Canada. Rick, your question for Dr. Welsing.
I do, and a brief comment. Good morning, Carl, and good morning, Dr. Welsing.
Good morning.
I am not I'm not picking on anyone with this comment. However, I'm attempting to identify and underline what I perceive to be a very important element in how we unconsciously participate in supporting white supremacy. And it relates to females. I've seen Dr. Welsing. She's a beautiful woman, a big coif of, natural hair, and it's a pleasure to behold a woman that looks that way. However, the change of one's natural appearance in order to appear to be acceptable to the dominant white culture is a critical fault that a lot of our women practice, and it has to be changed. Our great-grandmothers did not, as a common, engage in that kind of behavior. Many black women spend an inordinate amount of time and money and effort in the quest to make their hair different, or who alter their naturally beautiful skin. They have these exaggerated pinkish blushes. They use cosmetics on their eyes and lips and brows and fingernails and toenails, and you can see the effect on young men being raised by these women who themselves are now glamorizing themselves to follow in the path that their mothers or the females that are around them are exhibiting to them. And some of them actually are looking like androgynous, and many have adopted this emotional state that is psychologically supposed to be the state of femaleness or the women's psychology. So males by nature protect themselves and their family and their offspring. We call the police to protect our children and our women. So this is a real problem. So the question, Dr. Welsing, if you can, and I know there's not a lot of time left, as it relates to black females, how would you recommend that phenomenon that I attempted to describe can be addressed in order that it be changed and we realize that our appearance has a lot, what we pursue in our appearance has a lot to do with how we think of ourselves?
Okay, what I would say is that black men and black women